Hello. Today we're going to take a look at a very effective and traditional, well, not super traditional, but it's been around for a long time, dry fly called the elk hair caddis. You can see I've got two different ones here. The one that's in the vise is tied on a size 12 hook, and the one that's here in my hemostats is tied on a size 10. Typically, they're tied probably size 10 up to size 18 or even 20. And in some areas they even get down to size 8 on a longer shank hook to match some of the very large traveling sedges, as they're called, which can be sometimes upwards of an inch long. It's a very, very effective fly in catching fish and also in staying afloat. These things float like a cork and are very durable and last for many, many fish caught. Fairly simple fly to tie with just a few materials. So having said all that, let's just take a quick look at what we're going to need. The main body of the hook, of the fly, is some kind of dubbing. Now, you kind of the body of the fly. You kind of need to pay attention to the caddis that are in your area, and try to get a body color that's similar to what you find commonly in your area. However, I found that pretty much anything can work. So typically, I don't know how well you can see these different colors. I'm typically using stuff that range all the way from kind of reds up here and light tans down there, all the way down to darks, dark black even can be very effective. Not so much the white, it just happens to be in this container. So anything from a dark brown to a rusty reddy color to tan colors will work. And you can make it your choice of natural fur dubbing or synthetic dubbing. It doesn't really matter. Around that we'll be using a fine copper wire, or in this case I guess it's brass, or tinsel. It doesn't really matter. But keep it fairly fine. You don't want to add too much weight to the fly through the wire or the tinsel. There will be a hackle that we wind around the body, so you'll need a dry fly hackle for that. Again, go for kind of a color. I've got, just happened on these two half necks, I've got a brown and I've got a grizzly. As we tie this, we'll just make a choice. I think I'll be going not for the grizzly this time, but we'll choose some colors that match brown. In our area there's lots of brown, tan, rusty colored ones, and that seems to work very well. And then of course there's the wing that goes back, which is the main part of keeping the fly afloat. And traditionally that's tied out of elk hair. If you don't have elk hair, most people will just choose deer hair, and it works just as well. What is nice to get though is, if you can see it, the different sort of lining in the hair, where you get a dark band followed by a light band. It just seems to work a little bit better, and actually having the light band on the top can make it easier to see when it's floating on the water. So let's get on with this. The hook that I'm going to be tying it on today is just a number. You choose your brand. This one happens to be a mustad, just a size 12, normal shank length, dry fly hook. It's got a normal bend on it, so there's nothing special about it. Down eye, and away we go. I'm using, in this case, an 8/0 black thread. Again, you can choose the color of thread to match what's more common, or to match the materials that you're using. I'm just using black here. It basically gets hidden on the inside of all the materials. So we can attach the thread at the back and snap it off, or cut it off as you wish. Then we'll take our wire. Take a nice piece of wire, 2-3 inches long, off your spool. Make sure you attach that back in. And if you're using your normal scissors, always trim wire off way down here in the V to avoid dulling the main part of your scissors. We're going to attach the wire on our side of the hook, so the side that's closest to you. So just lay this underneath the wire will go underneath the shank of the hook up to the thread, give it a loose wrap, and what you'll find is that then the wire will then turn nicely and just lay along the side of the shank of the hook closest to you. And with nice turns, come back down to basically the bend of the hook, where the barb of the hook would be if you're using a barbed hook. You could even take a half turn further. Okay. Now we'll choose our hackle and tie that in. So as I said before, I'm going to choose the brown for this time. So I'm going to come to my, in this case it's a neck, and I'm going to choose just a feather that's going to be long enough and have fibers that will be wide enough to, I can't see it when I put it up like that, so just give me a moment here. I'll come over to this side. So I'm going to come in here and I'll choose a feather that will provide suitable length for the fly. Now, how do you know what's big enough or too big? In this case, essentially, if you see the gap of the hook that's here, if you take and you splay out the fibers from the shaft of the hook, what you'd like is for the fibers to be roughly the length of the gap to the shank and a little bit more. So these ones, they're perhaps a little bit long, and if that's the case, what I can do is I can just move up the shaft of the feather a little bit and start a bit further up, and they'll shorten up. And there we go, that's getting pretty good. So I'll just move up a little bit. I don't need to have such a long feather to work with. So there we are. I can gently flare them out, and you'll see that the fibers are getting pretty vertical. Now, as we've seen before in other videos, all feathers have a natural curve to them. Okay, and what we want with a dry fly, typically, it's not 100% true, but typically, is we actually want the fibers to curl forward towards the front of the hook. I'm just going to pan out just a little bit here. We want them to curve towards the front of the hook because that will help them to stay splayed up, and if there's any water pressure against them, what happens is they just get taller and they dig more into the water to create more surface tension to help hold that fly up. So rather than having the feather bend towards the back, when we tie this onto our hook, we'll have the feather bending towards the front. In the end, we're going to wrap from the back of the hook towards the eye. So to do this, I'll just hold my feather, put it up here right to where the barbs start, or the barbules on the feather start. Put in a loose wrap going this way. And then I like to figure eight, so now I'll go behind the feather once, twice, maybe 3 times, and what you'll find is when you do that, the feather will now lie perpendicular to the hook of the shank of the hook, which will ease the wrapping. Now I like to just tie down that whole thing rather than snip it off. It seems to make it a little easier to attach and won't pull out on me. That's a little bit of strength. Take my thread up, take my thread back, and now we're going to apply the dubbing. I typically like to use just a little bit of dubbing wax, again very sparse, gentle amount, just a tap, 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 and then choose the dubbing that you're going to use. Now I happen to have seen that it's pretty common to see sort of a rusty red one in some of the lakes that I fish in, so I'm using this synthetic dubbing here that's a mix, and I'll just pull out a little bit. These don't need very much. You've got a very small hook, and these don't have a typically very large body. So just take small pinches, apply it to the thread, and begin to twist it on. Always twist in the same direction. Add a little bit more. A little bit more. I need a little bit of wax on my fingers. It's too dry here. Okay, and you want just enough to basically hide the thread. If you're getting more than that, you're putting on too much. Make it nice and tight on there, and then begin with a wind forward, go back towards the feather to hide all the thread wraps, and then begin moving forward. If your dubbing is getting loose, just hit it again with the spin. Keep wrapping. Now for these, you don't need to have a beautiful tapered body or anything like that. You can, but it's not a necessity. And you can see here that I'm leaving a nice eye width between where my dubbing is ending and the eye of the hook. And that's so I have a place to tie in my elk hair, or in this case I'm going to be using deer hair. Once we've done that, the next step is to take our wire and wind it forward. And what I'm going to do is, since I put it on the side to me, I'm going to go under the hook and start gentle spirals moving forward up to where my thread finished. Now what I like to do is I just take my thread once, twice around the wire, so it's now caught the wire for sure. Go around. If the wire gets caught like that, just bring it forward, secure it down. Once you've done that, you can lift up your wire, get your fingers right close to the shank of the hook on the wire, and just helicopter. It'll just, after a little bit, it'll just snap off. There we go. Okay. Pull the materials back and just clean it up a little bit. For this point, I always put a half hitch in because I'm going to be not holding my thread. Put it aside on my thread holder. Now we're going to take the feather, the hackle, and wind it forward. I typically find for these ones that I like using a hackle plier. It just seems to give me a little bit better control. So I'll grab the feather and I'm going to make my wraps going forward. Again in a spiral. You don't need these touching each other. Then when you get to where your dubbing ended, you'll come up, go behind it with your thread, and let it come down. Behind it with your thread, and let it come down. You can do that 3 times. And the third one you can give it a little tightening pull, and you've now got that very secure. Trim off the excess, and that part is done. I'm just going to pull the fibers back a little bit so I can make sure that I've got a nice clean place to attach my hair. And as I said, I'm going to be using deer hair. Elk hair is the traditional hair to use. Deer works just fine. So I've just got a Primo strip. And this is body hair. So you'll find that the fibers can be quite long, which are much longer than we need. That's fine. We'll trim them off to the size we need. So for this, we're going to take actually a fairly decent clump, and you'll see why in a minute here. More than we need, or more than we need for the finished product. So I'm just going to take a reasonable clump. I'm going to get my rough scissors and come in and just trim that off, and trim it off as close to the leather as you can. And you'll end up with a mess like this. So we'll just pull out all those loose fibers, and then we're going to grab it by the tips. And what you'll see is that even though they all look to be the same length, many of them aren't, and you'll end up pulling lots of loose fibers out that weren't the same length. And then you'll also notice that on the inside, on the inside of this, there's a lot of fuzzy fur, and we do not want that. That just gets in the way of tying it down. So you need to either with your fingers tease that all out, or if you can get yourself a little comb, this is a mustache comb, or go to a dollar store and get a comb from there, and just brush out or comb out all the excess, and you'll see that quite a bit of junk comes out. Okay, and if you live like where I do, lots of static in the air, you'll get staticky stuff. So we'll just keep cleaning that until we're quite sure it's clean. Now what we need to do is, if you can see on here, the fibers are all different lengths, and that's not very good. We want them to be nice and tidy. So I've got a deer hair stacker here. I'm just going to take this clump, pinch it down so it'll fit into the stacker, slide it in, and give it a good 4 or 5 wraps. Okay, if there's any stray ones, just pull them out. And then when you open it up and pull it out, you'll see that the ends of the fibers are now aligned. So pinch them at the tip and pull them out. And when you do that, once again, come through and just see if there's any loose ones that weren't the same length. And if you remember a minute ago I said take more than you need, that's because this whole cleaning process will actually remove a lot of the fibers that were broken, were too short, were part of the fuzz, and you'll end up with a much more reasonable sized amount. Okay, if it ends up being too much, even in the end, don't worry, you can always, take some of that out and not use it. But you'll end up with something like this. Okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to address this to the hook like that, and what you want is you want the tips of these fibers to reach basically to the bend of the hook, give or take just a little bit. Okay, and I can see that that's very close. So I'll switch my hands with this, so I'm pinching in the same place so I know that what's back here is the right length, and you can see that we've got all of this excess fiber that we don't need. Now many people will now simply put this on, tie it on, and then trim it off. I don't like to do it that way. What I like to do is do this all in one step. I'm going to take this, and I know that for the head of this fly I need about 1/2 centimeter, a little less than that, of extra fiber for the head of the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm just going to trim off to where I need right now. Okay, so now what you can see is I have my clump. There's just a little bit extra going beyond it, and that's where I'm going to tie it in, right at my fingers. So again, I'll bring this back up to the hook. I'll bring my thread up, I'll pinch it, go around the shank of the hook, right at the eye, in a loose wrap, gently pull it, not tight, just loosely tight, pinch again, go around the second time, on top of the first, pull a little tighter. You can see that head is starting to flare out. I'll do my third wrap, pull it even tighter, and then I'll do some securing wraps. All the time I'm holding that whole bundle on the top. I don't want it rolling over my hook. Now I'll take this and do just a single half hitch at the beginning to secure it, and then I'll put in my whip finish. If you do manage to catch a few fibers and they end up going forwards or backwards as you're doing this, don't panic. We'll just trim them off. We'll secure this whip finish. I hope. There we are. Okay, come in, trim the thread close, and excuse me, essentially we have a finished elk hair caddis. Now you can see here I've got fibers that are now flayed forward and some that are a little out of whack. Just come in, give this guy, lay that back a little bit, find the ones that are too far forward, just a little, oops, that guy's being cantankerous. And take a look at the bottom. If there's a little bit that's rolled over, you can just trim it down. And there you have your finished Elk-Hair Caddis. Now, typically it's a good idea to come in and put a drop of head cement on the thread wraps on top, and to turn it over and put a drop of head cement on the thread wraps on the bottom, making sure to stay clear of that eye. If you do manage to somehow get a little bit of head cement in the eye, just take your dubbing needle and clean it out. I find that doing it from the bottom going up is a little easier. You're not trying to dig through the elk hair head or the deer hair head. Now I use UV glue, so I'm just going to set it. And there you have it. One finished Elk-Hair Caddis. These work amazingly well for trout, and if you don't have them in your box, you should. Thanks very much for watching.